Thanks. And which brings me actually to my second question. It's good that you brought it up. So inflation have been falling back substantially in the Eurozone, but services inflation and wage growth remain strong. So we expect the ECB to cut rates as soon as next week, so June. But the path beyond that is less clear. So do you think inflation will keep falling and give the ECB the space to cut further this year? Or is there a risk that the last mile on getting that inflation down to the 2% is a little bit trickier?
The last mile is always more difficult. Tackling moderate inflation is always complicated. It's always been complicated. Even when inflation at one point in the 1990s for some countries like in Eastern Europe got stuck to 6%, but we were 6% now. One could cynically say it doesn't make much of a difference between 2.4 and 2. But we know that, if we get used to 2.4, then why not 3? Why not 3.5, and so on and so forth. Now, so it's more difficult the last mile. There are risks. Yes, there are risks. But the main risk would arise from the main risk in terms of actual inflation would arises from unexpected increases in raw materials and commodity prices, of course, because of some disruption. But that will be temporary. One has to distinguish between what happened in 2001 from what happened in 2021 from what happened in 2022. 2021, in my view, the large increase in commodity prices was due essentially to an excessive push to demand from everywhere. I mean, very expansionary monetary policy and fiscal policy, and the combination of the two, which pushed up the demand for commodities faster than the limited capability of recovery of the production of raw materials. So there was a mistake in pushing too much on demand. 2022, there was a spike of gas prices due to Ukraine. At the moment, the risk is of the second time, but that's something that would not require an adjustment of monetary and fiscal policies. That's why I think I'm relatively optimistic that even if there are some negative surprises in terms of inflation, negative in the sense of higher inflation, the ECB realizes that this is a temporary shock. Unlike what happened in 2001, and look, in 2001, I was among those who were arguing that the ECB was delaying too much the increase in interest rates. But if the increase in inflation is due to a shock in a certain part of the world that prevents the regular flow of commodities, I don't think there should be a reason for the ECB to respond by delaying the decline in interest rates. As to the wage growth, the current level of wage growth is faster than the growth rate of prices, including in Italy. Last year, contractual wages went up by 3%, inflation went up by 1%, December over December. But that's normal, because it's just the level of real wages going back to normal. What happened to prices is that in 2001, prices went up because of the increase in commodity prices, ultimately because of the excessive push on demand. In 2022, commodity prices started declining, except for gas, but then gas again went up and then came down rapidly. And prices did not come down. Consumer prices did not come down. What happened is that profit margins widened. And now profit margins are, at least in Italy, but I believe also in other countries, are at a larger than normal level. That's why an increase in wages is just catching up from previous cuts in real wages. By the way, I believe that this is the very reason why employment is booming in Italy, because real wages have been cut by 10%. So it's cheap now to hire people. It will not last forever. Real wages will catch up. They are catching up. They managed to catch up a bit last year. I believe will continue this year. But this should not have a further inflationary impact, because it's simply eroding profit margins that are larger than normal. Conclusion, I think the ECB should go ahead in cutting interest rate in June. And then I would expect further cuts, unless, again, unless I'm wrong.
Well, okay, thanks. So I'm gonna actually jump a question that I had prepared because you mentioned sustainability and green transition and how costly it is, and it was part of my question because
Yeah.
obviously, and we saw it in COP28 and EU's goal to ambition at least to reduce the carbon emission by 55% by what in 6 years. So how can Italy effectively or Europe balance between growth economics and the need to develop a little bit more sustainable practices? It seems kind of almost contradictory.
Look, I'm willing to bet that with the new parliament, these targets will be postponed, I think. I mean, but already the Green Deal was very much supported by a parliament, European Parliament, where the Green parties had a larger voice, and the right was a bit smaller than what it appears the new parliament will be. And Ursula von der Leyen, if she's still the president of the Commission, she has already signaled that there will be a need for revision in the green goals. Maybe they were too ambitious. Certainly, they were very demanding for Italy because of our structure. By the way, we do need to do these things as in this country, not only to reduce CO2 emissions, but also to emit a lot of other stuff that gets into our lungs and not in the lungs of the Chinese. Chinese will benefit if we reduce CO2 emissions, even if they don't do anything. But they don't benefit if we reduce the so-called the polvere sottile. What's the name for in English of polvere sottile? Particulate, 2.5, 10. And the Po Valley is the worst place, together with Poland, is the worst place in Europe in terms of particulate. And so we have to do these things anyway. I think we'll have to do them more slowly because there is no majority in Italy now that wants a fast adjustment. And on the other hand, we are also avoiding stuff like nuclear energy, which I think should be part of the solution.
Now, I wanted to ask you also about, obviously, it's in the pipeline of everyone, US elections, Trump's threats of hiking tariffs on all his commercial partners, not just China, potentially Europe as well. What would be, these are quite severe risks, but what would be the impact on Italy's economic outlook, if there is any impact?
But depending on what Trump does, it is definitely an issue. And I understand raising tariffs on China for a number of reasons. But if the idea, as he already did, in putting higher tariffs also on European goods, it's clear that this is bad for us. Then we will have some way to retaliate. And it's not something that is conducive to faster growth. So one thing is to have, the world is big enough. So you can have a higher growth even if you have a globalization at, let's say, among US and Europe, plus some places where they have more natural resources. So I don't think that globalization really needs China. So you can have higher barriers. But if Trump starts putting barriers also between in the Atlantic Ocean, then that becomes a problem for both. In any case, what we have seen so far is nothing. Globalization is still there. These tariffs, higher tariffs introduced by Biden hit 4% of Chinese exports. You go to a US store, and it's completely full of stuff made in China at the moment. We have to see what Trump wants to do. I think that from that point of view, Biden is more reasonable, certainly in terms of interaction with the Europeans. Trump is a wild card.
Well, thank you very much for your insights. That was all for today's fireside in terms of questions.
I don't see the fireside.